So to begin with, I just want to mention or provide at least one definition. There are many of what data visualization is, just to kind of keep our focus in mind as we begin our workshop today. So Nathan Yao wrote a book called Data Points, in which he describes in detail how to think about creating data visualizations, what are they used for, elements of design to consider. It's a wonderful resource. There's actually an electronic copy that our library has access to. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend it. Again, it's called Data Points, and I can include a resources slide in this slide deck so that you have all of these references. So anyway, Nathan Yao writes, data visualization is a medium. It's a way to explore, to present, and express meaning in data. Generally, when we think about data visualization, we think about presenting our data for perhaps a public audience, perhaps a conference, perhaps preparing visualizations for publications. But data visualization also gives us a powerful way to explore our data as we're in the research phase. So we'll explore some data from the Old Bailey records from the Old Bailey courthouse in London. So this is the process that I kind of walk my students in our digital humanities class through as they're beginning to learn about working with data. So I'm just going to briefly review this and then we'll dive right in. So as we begin to work with our source materials, whatever they might be, we always start with our questions. So we draft our questions, we clean our data, and as a side note, Tableau now has a data cleaning package that it has made available. I haven't tried it yet, but if that's something that you'd like to play with, just know that that is also available. Also, all of the software packages from Tableau are free for students. So once your registration expires from this session, and it should be good through the fall quarter. But once that expires, you can just reapply as a student at UCLA. Just make sure to use your UCLA credentials, and you'll be able to renew that registration for free for the entire extent of your educational program while you're at UCLA. So first ask questions, then clean your data, explore the data to begin to understand the kinds of variables that you're working with, and seek answers to the questions that will also help you generate some new questions. As you begin to create some visualizations, you'll analyze and critique them, and then of course decide which ones you'll want to include in your story. So you've hopefully already downloaded Tableau Desktop. If you haven't done so yet, you might just want to kind of watch the video and then kind of go back and try this out on your own. I've got some resources here. Like I said, I'll add some additional ones as well. So what does Tableau do? Tableau allows us to quickly create plots. It's interactive, it's flexible. It allows you to gather your charts into dashboards to make telling your story or making your argument easier, because you can put your different visualizations in conversation with each other. You can also use a storytelling feature, which allows you to create kind of a linear narrative, walking someone through all of the different visualizations and statistics you've run on your data. As I mentioned, it has the built-in analytics tools, and it has new mapping tools and connectors. You still see the slide with the Yao quote. Okay, so let me make sure that you are seeing the correct screen. So it should be this one. Okay. Are you seeing a slide that has bullet points about Tableau now? Yes, okay, great, thank you. And thank you so much for letting me know. I've got chat open now so that I can see any other questions that pop up. Okay, so go ahead, and if you haven't already, download that Excel file. I'm going to drop the link into chat one more time just to make sure everyone has it. It's a Dropbox link, and it will take you to an Excel file to download. So Tableau has a number of different connectors, and it works with a variety of file formats, including connectors for Google Sheets. Yes, thank you so much, Beverly, for clarifying that this is the data for today. Go ahead and download that data. Once you have done that, then you'll go ahead and open Tableau. Let me get back to the screen that you will see. So I'm just opening my Tableau, and I will open a new book so that you can see. Okay. So the first step, of course, is to connect to your data source. So as I mentioned, you can load a lot of different types of data in here. We're going to be working with an Excel file today. Notice that you can also work with text files, JSON files, Microsoft Access files, and so many more. You can connect to servers. So those of you who are working in labs, you might actually have a Tableau server, so you might be able to connect that way. But if you click on the More link, you'll see a number of other options. So just be aware that there are many, many different file types that you can actually load into Tableau. Okay. So at this point, we should have our data downloaded, Tableau open. Go ahead and click on Excel, and then find where you have downloaded that file. It might just be in your downloads folder, and go ahead and link to that data file. So I'm just going to pause here for just a moment just to make sure that everyone is caught up to this point. So once you have loaded your data file, you'll come to a screen that looks like this, and in the lower left-hand corner, you'll notice that it says data source. So you can always come back here if you want to look at a table view of all of your data. This is always a good place to start, especially if you're working with a data set that you might not be quite as familiar with. So in just a moment, I'll have a couple of slides that will actually clarify what all of those variables are along the top. So the bolded kind of codes that you see along the top, those are our variables. And in this case, some of them are in shorthand, and so it's helpful to kind of see what those different variables actually mean. So again, these are records from the Old Bailey Courthouse in London. You can see that they're mostly from the late 18th century. The full data set is huge, so we're only working with the first 1,000 records just to make the file smaller, make the process easier, especially if you're trying to do this live while watching this tutorial on Zoom. So hopefully your data has loaded. I'm going to go ahead to the next 2 slides to kind of talk through the variables that we have, and then I'll come back to this one to talk about how to change the data type so that Tableau correctly recognizes the variables that you have. So again, I've shared the slides link. I can reshare that too, so that if you'd like, you can come back to this as we're playing with the data. So again, here's the link for the slides, so that if you want, you can have this up perhaps on a phone or another screen if you have one available. So the very first variable that we have is the unique table ID. This allows for relational linking among the different data sets that the Old Bailey Courthouse has made available. So we don't need to worry so much about that, nor do we need to worry about trial ID or defendant ID. The next one down, though, is sess date or session date, and then a separate variable for just the year. We have a binary variable, whether the trial was tagged as a speech, yes or no. This means whether the Old Bailey defendant speaks. And as you go down, you can see that there is like trial U count is the number of utterances, how many times people spoke up during the trial itself. We've also got total word count. So we've got a number of different variables and a number of different data types represented in our data set. So the second slide, again, continues that we've got lots of variables here. This will make more sense as we get into working with them in just a moment. But before I move on, I want to point out that when you loaded your data set, if you open up Tableau and go to your data source, you'll notice that the session date, is actually being recognized as a string rather than a date. Now this will change how we can work with that variable when we begin to create our visualizations. So we want to adjust that. So the way to do this is, let me change my share and move over to Tableau. There we go. Okay, so now you should be seeing my Tableau screen. If you don't, please just let me know in chat and I will fix that, but it should be up now. So I have fixed my session date, but if I hadn't, it would still look as yours probably does right now, and it'll have ABC. This is a string type, which means it's just recognizing it as plain text. Again, we want to change that so it recognizes it as a date. You can also, please note, do this once you are actually in one of your sheets and you're beginning to build these data visualizations. So if you forget to do this or you notice something later, you can either come back to the data source to fix it, or you can fix it right in the sheet itself. So we'll talk about how to do that in just a moment. So again, we want the date to be recognized as such, and so we just change that. Again, you just click on the ABC above session date and change that to date. So let me show that one more time. So click on ABC, go down to date, and you'll see a calendar icon once you've made that change. I've also asked that the year be recognized as a date as well. That's probably also listed either as a number or as a string. So again, you just click on whatever that symbol is in that column and change the data type to whatever it should be. Okay. As you scroll over, you'll notice that some of, for example, like the utterance count, the trial speech word count, these might be recognized as strings as well. And we actually want those to be recognized as numerical data. So again, if this is recognized as a string, you'll see ABC at the top of this column. Just change that to number, and if we're talking about word count or utterances, we're not going to have partial or decimal numbers. So go ahead and change that to number, and you can specify that this will be a whole number. So take a moment and just scroll through. Notice that there's a scrolling bar on the bottom that will allow you to move across the columns so that you can explore the data for a moment. And also just check to make sure that your variable types are being recognized correctly in Tableau. So I'm just going to put that in our chat really quick. So scroll over, check data types match. So now we're ready to begin creating our first visualization. So go ahead and go to your first sheet, sheet 1. Now I'm already going to have some a visualization there. Yes, so a question just came in. How does Tableau handle the null records in the variable once you change the data type to numeric? It'll still recognize it as null, and you'll see that in just a moment what it does with it once we start creating some visualizations, and I'll show you some different ways that you can handle that. Good question, thank you. So I'm going to open a new sheet. Mine will say sheet 3, yours will say sheet 1, all of that is okay. So we've got a number of different variables in here that are interesting to explore. So one thing to know, let me move my chat over, is you can click on Show Me in the upper right-hand corner of your sheet. And as you mouse over each of the different kind of standard visualizations that are built in, it will tell you what you need to highlight to be able to create each chart type. So for example, for a line chart, which is what I'm hovering over right now, this is for continuous data, it reminds you. You can try using a date and 0 or more dimensions, or one or more measures. So it will tell you what you need. So as you're just getting started with data visualization, this can be really helpful as you're beginning to figure out what kinds of charts might be helpful given the data that you have. So let me show you how that works. So for example, if we're curious about defendants' occupations, we can highlight that and then see if any chart types light up over here. So we can do a text table, but we're going to need a little bit more information for any other chart. So what we need Tableau to do for us is basically to create a pivot table. And what that means is that we're going to group all the people with the same occupation together and just count up how many people have each type of occupation. So Tableau makes this super easy. You don't have to, pre-create pivot tables in Excel and then bring them in. Tableau does it in one step. And that's what this measure is down in the lower left-hand corner. You might need to scroll down on the left side of your screen under data. You'll see tables at the top. These are going to be the ones that are blue are your dimensions. The ones that are green are your measures. And down here towards the bottom, you'll see a couple of things that are in italics. That means that Tableau has created these things for you. So, and if you hover your mouse over, you'll get some nice help text. So this tells you that this is a generated field that counts the number of records in this table. So while we've got defendant occupation highlighted, if you're on a PC, it'll be Control. If you're on a Mac, it will be Command. Hold that down and then click on that. It'll say first 1,000 Old Bailey defendants count. And if you can't see that whole variable title, just expand. Notice that you can expand that frame on your computer. So now that we've got both of those highlighted, notice that in Show Me, we have a number of different chart types that would work for this kind of data. So we've got a dimension, which for those of you who are familiar with categorical data, that's what this is. It's basically qualitative data, data that can be summed. You can take percentages of it, but you really can't do any numerical calculations with it. So we've got our dimension as defendant occupation. We're going to count how many people of each occupation we have. So we can do a bar chart with that information. We could do a stacked bar chart, which would probably make less sense here, at least given the dimension that we have highlighted right now. We could do a pie chart, but my guess is there are going to be far more occupations than is going to make sense to visualize in a pie chart. One good rule of thumb when thinking about pie charts is if you have 6 or fewer different categories that you're going to visualize, a pie chart might work well. But if you have more than that, for example, let me just click on it and show you what happens. So first of all, let's note that the largest slice of the pie is going to be null. And so we can exclude that so that we can actually see what the different occupations are. But this chart is really difficult to read because the slices of the pie are so tiny. So we're actually going to choose a different chart type. And one other note, so that I could actually get the pie to appear larger on the screen, as I changed the view. So Couple things to know about Tableau. There are a lot of features built into it, and sometimes you have to go searching or you have to Google where to find something. But in this case, thankfully, we've got a nice little drop-down menu. We started with standard, which was really, really small and difficult to see. So I changed my view to entire view to make it larger. So I don't necessarily like a pie chart for this kind of data, so I'm going to create a tree map, which works much better when we've got so many different categories of our variable. So let me get back to chat. As you have questions, as we move through this, please feel free to drop them in chat, and I will try to notice them and respond kind of live as we're going through this workshop. So a tree map, again, is really good when you've got categorical data, you're summing it up, you're trying to figure out how many of each type of thing we've got. So as we look through here, in the late 18th century, many of the defendants who were being charged with crimes and brought to court at the Old Bailey in London were servants. Not surprising, there's a class element here. But the next one down is wife. This is interesting. So if we go back to our tables on the left here, we will notice as we scroll up, we have a variable called defendant gender. And Tableau is really nice because it often works with drag and drop. And so if you drag, so highlight defendant gender on the left and drag that over to color and release it, it will automatically divide up your view by gender, and it will give you the key on the right-hand side. And my chat disappeared again. Let's see if I can get that back. Okay. So if you are still seeing a really large portion of your chart taken over and you're not seeing this amount of detail, click on that largest box. And if you're on a PC, it'll be right click. If you're on a Mac, it'll be 2-finger click or command click. And ask Tableau to exclude those null values because there are a fair number of defendants about whom we have less information. So let's remove the null values. When you're preparing this for a presentation or publication, you just should note that there were this many null values that have been excluded, just so that the reader or the viewer is aware that we're only working with a portion of the data. So again, a tree map works well for categorical data and allows you to quickly summarize the different categories in a variable that you have. So again, let's give this a title. So I double clicked on sheet 3 right above the chart, and I'm going to give it a name. So this is defendant occupation by gender. And you can either click OK or apply. Either one is fine. So again, you just double click on the title above the chart and you can rename it. You can do the same thing just like in Excel or Google Sheets with your sheet names. So this is occupation by gender. And the data, especially because it's from the 18th century, is coded as the gender data is binary. So just be aware that in this data set, yes, I recognize that gender is not binary, but our data suggests, for these folks, that's how they were identified. And again, for those from the humanities, social sciences, you just make note of this when you're preparing to present your data. Okay. So to create a new chart, along the bottom, there is a little, looks like another little chart, like a bar chart with a plus sign. Go ahead and click that. Tableau is also helpful because it will give you information about the icons if you just hover your mouse over. So if you're wondering what something does, simply hover your mouse over that, that icon or that option, and you should get some help text pop up. Okay, so let's move on to some other chart types. Okay. So we've also got information about the word count. So how many words were spoken in a trial. We've also got information about the verdict. So what happened to those who were actually, or what decisions were made about the cases that were brought before the justices at the Old Bailey. So again, this is a dimension because it's categorical data. So if you scroll up, you'll find it kind of midway down on the left-hand side, defendant ver cat, which means defendant verdict category. And there's also a subcategory here that we can play with in a moment. But to begin with, we'll just take a look at the general verdicts. And because we've got temporal data, we can actually plot this over time. So I would go with session date just because it's more specific. So again, to select both the category or the dimension that you want to work with and another variable, hold down Control if you're on a PC. If you're on a Mac, it will be Command. And then if you go to Show Me, let's see, we also need to count up how many of each verdict we have. So we need that summarizing function that Tableau has built in. So again, that's going to be all the way down, second from the bottom, and it'll be the defendant's count. So once you have all three of those highlighted under Show Me, again, you'll see a number of different options. I want to talk about the stacked or the area chart because it can create some really nice visualizations, but for those who don't work with it very often, it might be somewhat confusing. So I just want to talk about what this kind of chart is good for and what it represents. So an area chart or a stacked kind of line graph like this does a really nice job when you've got categories that sum to a total. So in this case, if we add each of the different types of verdicts together, we'll end up with all of the verdicts for that session date. So if we look at 1780, if we add the guilty and the not guilty verdicts up here, we will have the total of the verdicts. So that's what the combined height here means. And you can also see proportionality, which is really helpful. So we see that a much larger proportion of the verdicts were guilty. This has a lot to do with England's judicial system and the notion at the time that you were guilty and had to be proven innocent. It's the reverse of the way that the American system works. Okay. Something else to note, again, there are so many different features that you can play with here. One is color. So if you click on the color card under the marks card, and you can play with the opacity. So if you want something that's a brighter, bolder color, change that opacity to 100%. You can just click right in that box, change the number, or move the slider. So you can use the slider to kind of see what it looks like at different percentages. You can have the border on, you can choose to leave it off. Either is fine. And you can also click on Edit Colors, and there are a number of built-in palettes. Note that there is a palette specifically for color blindness, and this works for any type of color blindness. So this is something I try and mention in all of my presentations. It's really, really, really helpful to make your visualizations accessible to everyone to use a colorblind palette. And so you can click on the palette of your choice and assign palette, and then it will just automatically change your colors. You can also double click on any of these colors and you can enter the hex code, you can enter, if you have specific values, you can enter those, or you can use the color picker. So there are a lot of different ways to change the colors in your visualizations. Once you've chosen a palette that you like, go ahead and click apply. And then okay. And then you'll see your graph shift. Okay. I think we've got time to build one more visualization here. And it might be helpful to take a look at defendant word count. So if you are in the same view that I am, where we had scrolled all the way down, the defendant total word count is going to be close to the top. Note that if it's a word count, it should be recognized as numerical data, but it's not. So if you highlight it, just to help you remember where it is, and click on that ABC next to it, note that you can also change the data type right here in your worksheet. So I'm going to make sure that it recognizes it as a number. So defendant total word count. And then I'm curious if word count differs by gender. So again, I'm going to hold down Control so I can multi-select. Gender, again, if you're on a Mac, it'll be Command. And then I'll also need the count here. Okay, all right. Jesus found the legend. Okay, great. All right, wonderful. Any other questions? Again, feel free to drop them in chat, especially if I cover anything too quickly, please let me know. Okay, so again, we've got defendant total word count, gender, and the total counts. So one way to do this is, let's actually, this is a really good, this is a really good point. So I just realized I made a mistake. And so I want to fix that mistake. Tableau is really good. If you want to clear your whole graph, you can go up towards the top. You'll see, again, another little bar chart, but with an X. You can click that to clear the entire sheet, or you can undo. This is super helpful. You can walk back steps that you have taken as you've built your visualization. So if you hit a point where your graph turned out not looking the way that you had intended, you can walk back to where it looks the way that you wanted it to and then kind of adjust from there. I'm actually going to clear my chart and start this graph over. So I want, let's see, where did that go? Defendant word count and gender. And we can also see how this might vary over time. I see what the problem is. So we changed defendant total word count to numerical data as a data type, but it's still recognizing it as a dimension. So we actually need to change this to be a measure. So right now it's being recognized as categorical data rather than numerical. So we need to convert it in Tableau's parlance from a dimension to a measure. So again, if you highlight it, you'll get, the other thing to know about Tableau is there are these little tiny drop-down arrows that you have to look for. If you aren't already wearing glasses, we will probably all be wearing them by the end of the year, especially if you're working with a tool like this. But there's a little tiny drop-down arrow to look for, and then you can go to convert to measure, and that will bring it down here. So now when we highlight defendant total word count and defendant gender, there we go. Now we can actually see a breakdown. We can start with a regular bar chart and just compare the sum. Notice that this has aggregated all of the word counts for all speakers identified as female, and it's also aggregated the total word count for all speakers identified as male. So the other thing that we can do is bring year into this. So something else to know about the way that columns and rows work in Tableau. Columns, just think like, you know, the Parthenon or, you know, Greek architecture. The columns are going to be vertical. So that's going to be your x-axis. Think about it as working with the vertical space of your worksheet. Your rows are going to be horizontal. Okay, so we've got defendant gender in our rows and the total word count in our columns. Now, what if I want to take a look at this by year? So I'm going to play with this, and I haven't tried this in a while, so let's see what happens when we just drop year here. So now we've got the total word count and the year divided up. That's not what we want. So we can play with several different kinds of visualizations, either through Show Me, or you can start reorganizing where you have your data. So now we see that we've got, this is the female, or the word count for speakers identified as female on the top, and those identified as male along the bottom. If we want this to appear on the same graph, we might want to actually just drag defendant gender over to color. So it's really fantastic that Tableau works with drag and drop, because it allows you to do what I just did and play with your data and see how, as you move things around in that space, how it changes the visualization that you're creating. So we've got just a few minutes left. I want to give you a couple of minutes to play with some of the features and to ask questions. So let's take the next 3 minutes. Go ahead and play with the data. I'll probably create another chart myself. Drop any questions that you have into chat. And if you would like to share your screen, just let me know in chat and I can make you a co-host so that I can actually see what's going on if you're having any particular challenges with Tableau. So again, just take a few minutes, go ahead and play with some of the data. Let me know if you have questions. And when we come back, I'll show you one more chart type, and that will be to create a stacked bar chart. Just as a reminder, don't forget to give your graphs titles. Definitely best practice. You can also change your labels. This is something I just had to do for a publication I've got coming out, because I just had something like this where it was kind of in code or shorthand. So you can double click on your axis labels and then just quickly change them so that this is legible to someone else. Take about one more minute and we'll create one last chart. Okay, one last chart, and then I will turn it back over to Beverly. So I mentioned that we could think about the subcategories of verdicts. We can also take a look at, there's information here on the punishment for those who were convicted. So Tableau also works with hierarchies. So a quick way to do that, in this case, we're going to drag our subcategory, the defendant punishment subcategory, to the defendant punishment category. And then you can create a hierarchy. You literally just drag the subcategory on top of the category and name your hierarchy. So this is going to be punishment. And then you'll notice that you get a new icon here. Here's our hierarchy called punishment. The top category is the punishment category, and then we see our subcategory underneath. So we've just quickly created a hierarchy. So we can drag our defendant punishment category over to rows. We'll need our number of records. Again, this is categorical data, so we'll need the number of records, or the count, to go to columns. And by just doing that, Tableau will automatically choose a bar chart. Notice here that it's showing you the null records. Again, you can either leave that or you can pull it out. And then again, if we want to see the punishments by gender, we can pull gender over to color, and this will automatically create a stacked bar chart for you. If you prefer a different orientation, this is one last thing I'll show you. There's a swap rows and columns icon, kind of about a third of the way over along the top bar there, right next to the clear the worksheet. So don't clear the worksheet, but if you want to swap rows and columns, you can do that if you prefer to see a different orientation of your data. Generally, if I've got categories like this, I like to see them in this orientation. And one last thing I'll show you is, as you hover over this, because you've created a hierarchy, it recognizes that, and you can click that little plus sign and it will break down your subcategory for you and show you both the category and the subcategory. So this is a really great way to provide a top view of your data and then allow either you or your viewer to drill down into that data to get more detail. Okay, that is all the time that I have for today. Any other questions? I know that was really quick, and I know a number of you are working with scientific data. So in the resources, I'll add an additional slide for you. I will drop some more resources in for life sciences data, for some of the more numeric data that you'll be working with. There are a lot of tutorials and information available for you. So I'll just point you in that direction, and feel free to follow up if you do have questions. Oh, I'm sorry, there is one more thing I just wanted to share really, really quickly. Let me go back to my slides. Let's see, nope, different share. Here we go. Get out of my slides. Oh goodness, too many Zoom things up. Okay, very quickly. Someone you should also know, especially if you are in the sciences, anywhere in the sciences, Ibrahim Ali is a new librarian at UCLA. He's fantastic. He's worked in industry in working with both chemical and biological data. He can answer just about any data visualization questions you have, but also about all the other skills that you're learning this summer. So definitely get in touch with him. He showed you R. Excellent, you know who he is. Wonderful, good. So I highly recommend getting in touch with him if you have other questions about Tableau or about any of the other skills that you're learning.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Sanders. Any final questions before we end this part of homeroom today? I think we had a couple of questions also about the recording, but maybe we can connect offline to figure out the best way to share that.
Yeah, I'll make sure to share a link so that you can share it out with everyone else.
Fantastic, thank you. So if folks could stick around for a few more minutes,